Hi, I'd like to talk to you today about music making workflows, especially in regards to making electronic music, and especially it might be quite useful to you if you're neurodivergent or in any way have executive dysfunction. But really, I think this applies to anyone who uses a DAW. I hear a lot of people get into a situation where they sit down to write some music and they want to write a melody, and so they kind of, make a simple, get in a simple kick drum, snare drum, and okay, I'm going to write the melody now. And before they realise what's happened next, it's been about 5 hours later, and they realise they just spent the last 5 hours just auditioning snare drums and not actually gotten around to the melody writing part. So I think I've kind of accidentally stumbled across a way of kind of avoiding that whole pitfall. So I think it's hopefully useful for me to share that with other people. So the two main methods of making electronic music I've spotted are samples or sounds first versus music first. With the samples first approach to making music, this was very popular in the 90s when samplers were kind of starting to get vaguely affordable. You could make a bunch of interesting sounds, and then later on you can make music with those sounds. So you could have sound library or sample library building days, and then separately to that you have music making days, and you don't need to worry about doing both at once because you've separated out the two. You just spend a day making wacky sounds and recording them all, and then whittling down your favourite few sounds, and then you just isolate those, sample them into a sampler, and there you've got some interesting sounds. And on a completely different day you make music with those sounds. I'm pretty sure that's what Aphex Twin did in the 90s. Like, say, they'd go to a scrap heap and clang on things and bang on things and record that, then later on sample it and turn it into various different tracks. Like that We Have Arrived remix he did, QQT, TDQ. Those ones, those have the same aerosol sample and kind of clangy railing type sample as his remix of, as In the Heart of It All that he did for 9 Inch Nails. And there's just, some samples he made for himself, and then later on he made some music with those samples. It's the same with 9 Inch Nails. When Trent Reznor was making the Downward Spiral, he didn't want a clean sounding drum kit, so he got his drum kit and he took it into various rooms, like bathrooms and things, just rooms where you can actually hear the room itself, and he would hit the drums at various different levels, like velocity sensitivities, quiet, loud, so be hitting on the drums, and then he'd record that in all the different rooms and everything. He'd then painstakingly import all of this into his Akai S1100, and he'd make velocity sensitive patches where he could just play the drums on the keyboard. And so when it came time to write the actual songs for the Downward Spiral, he already had all of these sounds, like the drum kits and everything, that was already done. He didn't need to worry about doing that at the same time because that's too much to concentrate on at once. He just broke it down into simpler tasks. So certainly when I was tracking in my teens in the 90s, I would say I had a monophonic old synthesizer, an SH101, and I think it was out of tune, but I'd make weird sounds on it and I'd record them, and then I'd sample them, and then I'd make music out of those samples at a later date. It's quite good with the trackers because you just say, oh, I like the sound in this song I did earlier, I'll just go into that song and load up the sample. It's very easy to do. So that's sound first or sample first music making. You could go at it the other angle. Basically I make a chip tune first, and I figure if it sounds good as a chip tune, then it'll probably sound even better once I've played it on an analog modular synthesizer. So one day I'll go into the studio, I'll basically write a chip tune, and that's it. I'm done for the day. Once I've finished writing, here's the melody, counter melody, bass line, I've worked out here's the rhythm, the drums, here's where it all kind of starts and stops. I've worked out the structure of the song, here's the A section, the B section, each has a different 2 or 4 chord progression, and I've worked out how to kind of gloss over the seams a bit where one section kind of bleeds through into the other one, so it's not quite as jarring. Work out all of that. In one day I'll do most of that. Another day I'll come back and listen to it with fresh ears and think, actually I can gloss over the seams a bit better, I can improve the intro and outro a little bit, maybe add like one more part, or just little things to tidy it up a bit. The only patching I allow myself to do is with a subtractor in Reason, making square waves. I'll just say change the ADSR envelope generator, so if I want it to be like slow to fade in and out like a pad sound, okay, I'll let myself do that, just get it roughly right. If I want it to be a really snappy percussive sound, I'll let myself do that. But it's kind of important to get those kind of broad strokes right, but I do not get bogged down into the details of exactly what it's going to sound like, because I know this is just a temporary scratch sound. I'm going to completely replace it later. So just to get a rough feel, like, okay, the song's going to have rises at the end where it goes, okay, I best make it sound a bit like that, but not get bogged down in the details of that. It's just a temporary scratch sound. It's not going to be the final one. I don't need to worry about making it perfect, just good enough to remind myself later on this is roughly what it's going to sound like. So once I've done that, another day I'll go export it as a MIDI file into a completely different machine which has Reaper on it, where I patch and perform everything on hardware synthesizers. Obviously you don't need to use hardware synthesizers, but it probably helps if you kind of segregate out the two tasks. So on a separate day I recommend patching up the sounds or finding samples that you think sounds good with a particular rhythm, or with those particular melodies. And this is where I get bored, you see, so I like to kind of make the sounds dynamic and just kind of twiddle the knobs out of boredom. And I think that makes my music kind of unique here pretty much, because the music itself is very simple, but the sounds are quite complex and dynamic. So if you listen to one of my tracks, very often if you just listen to one particular part, you'll notice that the sound changes over the duration of the song. That's just me getting bored while it's playing out, and I want to do something. I'm not suggesting anyone else needs to go to these extremes. By all means, use off-the-shelf sample libraries, and anything like that is fine. I don't want to gatekeep here. I just find that for me personally, segregating out these tasks, so I'm composing some days and making the sounds other days, that works really well for me, and it might work well for you too. Then another day just to kind of mix it all down, but because I dial in all the sounds myself, I don't really need to EQ or compress all that much. It's mostly just leveling and putting on some fun effects like delay and reverb. It used to be, I thought the advantage of doing this with a music first, sound second workflow is that if it sounds good with chiptunes, it will sound good on anything. But I think the bigger advantage here, especially with executive dysfunction, is you've already broken down a complex task up into lots of simple steps. You can just do the next step. You don't have to worry about the breaking it down part. That's done for you. And even doing it the other way around, I think with sounds first, the same kind of thing applies there. You don't have to get daunted as to what step to do next. It's all kind of clearly worked out for you. It's not exactly a production line. Is still very much creative. You still have to come up with a creative piece of music that expresses yourself, and you still need to come up with creative sounds. But because you're not trying to do both at the same time, I think it makes it less daunting. So I think for me at least, it's really helped to segregate all of these parts. I don't think it really matters too much which order you're doing it in. It can make for a very different sound, but you need to do what's right for you and what works well for you personally. And either way, I think just by splitting it up, even if you don't stick to it rigidly, which you shouldn't do anyway, these are not rules. It's just, a helpful way of eliminating options if and when you get vertigo from choice paralysis. So I'm not recommending anybody else do what I do and make kind of simple music and then dynamic sounds that change throughout the song, because I'm listening to each part one at a time and getting bored and twiddling the knobs for each and every part. I go to quite extreme measures like that. But I would say that if you're ever stuck not knowing what to do next, or if you find yourself often sitting down to write a melody or a chord progression, and then you realise, it's like 5 hours later and I've just been auditioning snare drums and I haven't actually made a single note. If that ever happens to you, then maybe you should try splitting up the process into its constituent parts and have a composing day and a sound design day, rather than trying to do it all at the same time. It works well for me, and I do recommend that anyone else try it out just to see if it works for you. and there's nothing to lose if it doesn't. Okay, now you know. If it does, maybe that's going to help you out a bit, which I really would like to do. So I hope this does help some people out. I don't want to keep this way of working well for me that I've stumbled across just to myself. I want to help encourage other people to work out what works for them as well. So please do let me know if this does work out for you.